Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Product Angle. And on today's episode, I have two product managers. First, Nikitha is a product manager at VMware based in San Francisco. Nikitha works on all things VMs, containers, and Kubernetes. Prior to VMware, Nikitha was a software engineer and a product manager at various SaaS startups. Nikitha got her bachelor's in electrical engineering from the Manipal Institute of Technology and an MBA from UCLA Anderson. Nikitha likes technology, design, reading, writing, sustainable fashion, D2C, live shows, yoga, boxing, puppies, and typing in lowercase. Welcome, Nikitha.
Thanks, Pradeep.
Love the view behind you.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
And also we have Pippa. Pippa is one of 4 digital product managers at the Natural History Museum in London. Pippa works with a cross-functional team to improve the existing website and create new digital products, all aimed at getting more people into the natural nature and hit exploring. Before becoming a product manager, Pippa worked in digital marketing and content within the charity and education sectors. Welcome, Pippa.
Hello.
Hey, so thank you. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you guys. So before we begin, I just want to put it out there. Both of you are product managers for a software product. Now, the difference is that, Nikitha, you work for a company whose main business is software, whereas Pippa, the Natural History Museum, is not a software business per se, but you both are product managers who work on software products, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So before we get started, also, tell us something that we cannot Google about you guys.
Pippa, go ahead.
Well, apart from the fact that Nikitha has way more hobbies and interests than I do, and I now feel overwhelmed, I do or have occasionally dabbled in playing the ukulele, and there is a very good reason why you can't Google it or you can't see any of it online, because I am terrible at it.
Excellent. I've had some fun playing with that at some events as well, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I guess mine would be that, Nikitha is a pretty common Indian name, but my dad had some ulterior motives when he chose it. I believe he was a communist back in the day, and Nikita Khrushchev was someone he somewhat admired at the time. So he kind of slid that one by my mom. But yeah, here we are.
Excellent. It's always good to have a history behind your name.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you both get started in product management? Because I've asked this question to multiple product managers, and over time, I've started to realize that a lot of people don't become product managers, they fall into product management. So I'm curious to hear, what your story of how you got into product management is.
Nikitha, you first time?
Oh, yeah, sure. So for me, like Pradeep mentioned, I did start out as a software engineer. I did that for about 2 years, was working at a startup. Unfortunately, while I really enjoyed what I was doing, I just never felt like it was something that I would ever be really, really good at. And that's mainly because a lot of my skill sets weren't being used in my role as a software engineer. And so when I really looked at what was out there for me, still in the tech industry, because I knew that's where I wanted to be, I found that product management was, at the time for me, very new and something I hadn't really heard about before, but seemed to be a confluence of skills that I really, I felt I had, and I felt that I would be interested in doing. So, right at the intersection of business, technology, design, all of these things that I really care about. And so for me, I kind of knew that was where I was going to go, and then began the process of actually trying to make the transition, which wasn't easy. But I think after about 8 months of really applying to various positions and preparing for interviews, I finally managed to get a role that I was really happy about. So that's kind of how the transition went for me.
Excellent. How about you, Pippa?
Very different. As Pradeep says, I fall into that category of falling into it. I worked in the charity sector, and one of the most recent charity I worked at before the Natural History Museum, I was doing digital roles and sort of worked my way up in that sense. So I was kind of low level when I started and became a sort of manager level And then they wanted to explore building a new product, and they'd heard about kind of product management ways of working, and were like, can we give that a try? A charity that was very open to kind of new ideas and new ways of working, and kind of said, Pippa, do you want to give this a go, basically? So it was really good. I kind of didn't know anything at all about product management. I learned a lot just from reading on the job and trying to figure out what my role was. There was one other product manager who was also brand new and had been hired internally as well. So there wasn't really kind of any sort of established processes or ways of working. And that was kind of enough of a taster, I think, for me to decide that, the charity didn't really have the right kind of infrastructure to help me learn enough and grow enough as a product manager. But the Natural History Museum did still offer that opportunity to continue in the role, but actually kind of learn and grow as a product manager. So moved there, been there ever since.
Fantastic. So as in your day-to-day roles, tell us about working context. So, talk about team size, developers, PMs, number of PMs in the team, and where does it sit within the org? So Nikitha, if we can start with you first.
Yeah, so VMware is a very large company. I think we had at last count over 30,000 employees across the world, and we're organized by business units. Each business unit is typically aligned to a specific product line. So in the business unit that I am, which is also the oldest one in the company, I believe we're at something around 500 engineers and a team of 40 product managers right now. So it's a fairly large team. And within that, we're organized into sub-teams, and I'm part of a smaller team that's about 8 PMs at this point. And so we own specific functional areas of the product. And we like to think of it as, solving for a use case. So everything that goes into what does a user need to complete a given task? And that's how we organize our PM functions.
Excellent. How about you, Pippa?
I'm going to say very different again. There are 4 product managers, actually currently 3, but supposed to be 4, at the Natural History Museum, like full stop. And we sit within the digital media team, which is part of a kind of bigger marketing, communications and digital function, which in itself sits kind of within an engagement directorate. So that's kind of the biggest area. The Natural History Museum has about 800 employees total. And most of them, as you can imagine, are focused either on science and our scientists, which is about kind of 250 to 300. Then there's a load of people that help the museum actually function as a public attraction. All the front of house and back of house staff that takes. There's areas in kind of science education and outreach as well. And then finally, there's a digital media team that's kind of tucked away. And yeah, there are 4 product managers. We have kind of teams of front-end developers, content editors, and 3 UX designers who are split among us, and 2 data scientists. And that's it, really. So yeah, much smaller in scale than Nikita's example.
Fair enough. Now, in your own words, what do you think the company, or what does the company you work for do? What's the main product? Because I've said that, Nikitha, you work for VMware, which is a software-based company, and obviously Pippa, the Natural History Museum, is not. So just talk me through what is the main product, or what in your own words, what does the company you work for do? So Nikitha, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I would say in the simplest form, VMware makes software for you to run your data centers for companies that have them. So if you're not on the public cloud, your options are fairly limited in terms of the kind of software you need to actually run your own data center. And that's what we help companies do really effectively.
Got it. And Pippa?
Great. Complicated. We are a lot of things to a lot of people. Like I said, we do scientific research. We're a visitor attraction. We're a historic building. We do education. We do outreach, and we also do content publishing via our website and create new digital products. So yeah, a lot of things within our one museum.
Fair enough. Now, so I kind of like know where this is going to go, but let me ask the question, Nikitha. Who are your typical users and customers?
Yeah, so our customers are pretty much all of the Fortune 500 companies, all of the ones that are fairly large, especially companies that are in the financial and in the healthcare space that can't really be in the public cloud for data security and privacy reasons. So those are typically our largest customers. And then in terms of users at these companies, it's usually the IT administrators. So the people that are responsible for keeping everything up and running, the sort of backbone of every major industry. So those are the folks that we're dealing with. Very technical, very smart. So really intelligent users to have, but also makes our life both difficult and easy at the same time, I would say.
Absolutely. They know that they know the tech behind the software, right? So they.
Oh yeah.
Yes. How about you, Pippa?
So I think if we're kind of looking at traditional user customer models, Natural History Museum is closest to being B2C. We're very much about kind of opening up our content and science to the public through everything that we do and through our digital products and our website as well. So yeah, our users can be anyone. We do tend to target the UK, just, it's where we're based, but we're more than happy to have global reach, and we do achieve that. We're mostly kind of, it's mostly people looking for answers on specific topics, like, when did the dinosaurs go extinct? All the way through to people who really want to like observe nature and want to know the details of how to identify orchids. It's a crazy set of people. But it's kind of anyone who's interested in nature, really, I'd say, is our users.
Absolutely. I mean, I have a very soft spot for the Natural History Museum because growing up, school trips were there. And since it's free admission, my dad and I used to visit Natural History Museum a lot on Saturdays. And, I remember the staircase, you walk up and you got the Stegosaurus, I think it was. And, underground somewhere, you have all these beetles and different, insects and things like that. It has a very special place in my heart, the Natural History Museum.
And we're really lucky because that's the case for a lot of our users. So when we ask people to kind of help us, like give feedback on things or give us ideas or fill in surveys, they're just like they're on it. No money needed. It's just like, yeah, no, we love you guys. It's brilliant. So yeah,
absolutely,
we really enjoy that.
Absolutely. So what would you say the mode that your team or company is? Are you, building brand? Are you scaling a product, or are you optimizing it? Where would you see your team fit in, Nikitha?
Yeah, so I would say the industry that we're working in is pretty mature at this point, and we've almost saturated our entire market, which is great. But I think now we're looking for new opportunities to kind of break through. And so one of the things we're doing is how do we make our consumption model more similar to the public cloud in terms of ease of use for developers, which means adapting all of these new technologies that we're seeing today. So containers, Kubernetes, so expanding beyond what originally was our main focus, which was virtual machines.
Got it. Thank you. What about you, Pippa?
It kind of varies per product team because we have 4 product teams and a lot of things to look after. The 4 product manager roles have quite different focuses. So we have, for example, kind of 2 extremes of the spectrum. We have a commercial product team, and they're very much focused on, I would say, optimizing our existing journeys. They have a clear flow and a funnel, and it's all about optimizing that. Whereas like my team, when we're not currently going through COVID, because we've kind of had to change our structures a bit for that. But my usual team is a bit like a startup. We are coming up with new product ideas, testing them out, getting them out to users, and kind of, trying out new things and seeing what sticks. So it varies across the different product roles in the museum.
So continuing with that theme, how do you let's say you have an idea or something you want to test, just walk us through the time you figured out this is what you want to test or this is what you want to try to the point that you've actually tried it and you have some kind of results to look back at. Talk us through that process.
Sure. So we might kind of get an idea, like be inspired by something like one of our outreach team are doing, or the kind of one of our scientists is doing, and think, hey, that's a great idea. Let's get it out to more people. Let's think about how we could build something like that. From there, we might kind of mock something up, or like I'd normally start creating a sort of slide deck to sort of note down my thoughts and think about what we need to test. I've used Teresa Torres's opportunity solution tree before to try and figure out like what alternatives there are and if this is the best solution and kind of what we need to go through. And then what we've done in the past is, because we have these lovely users who are very amenable to trying stuff out for us and don't kind of punish the brand for it, we actually have done smokescreen tests in the past. So we've put something up pretending, and I literally built a mock-up in PowerPoint to do this, pretending that the product exists and creating like a mock-up for it and an image and a fake page, kind of, and then put a link, and then the link, instead of going to the product, goes to a survey that says, hey, it's not ready yet, but tell us why you liked this idea. And then we track how many clicks that link gets and where we can gain interest from across the rest of the website and see whether or not it's a goer, basically.
Fair enough. How about you, Nikitha? How do you do it at VMware?
Yeah, it's a little bit different to what Pippa said, mainly because like moving fast and breaking things is not something you can really do when financial institutions depend on your software running all the time. So even before we even run any kind of test, there's really a lot of engineering effort that has to go into it to make sure that nothing is actually broken. So we only tend to run these kind of experiments once we're really sure that there's something here that we truly want to test. So we spend a lot of time talking to customers and users prior to even trying something out, just to gauge what level of interest there is in it. And that usually comes in the form of customer interviews and surveys. And once we see that, yes, there is certain value to this idea, then we try to build it out and in the simplest way possible. So like an MVP version of that. And we have a small community of highly engaged users. That is our beta user community. So they have access to early versions of our product and they know the risks involved when they're trying something like that out. So we do recommend that they don't use this in production. But we do ask them to, try it out and let us know their thoughts. And that's another way in which we get a lot of feedback too. So it tends to be a much longer process. I wish it were as easy as, A/B testing something where you can just flip a switch and turn it on. So a lot of this has to be more qualitative too. So it really involves talking to people. Surveys don't seem to gather feedback as well for us because there's so many different aspects that our customers are considering. Like cost is a big concern, security is a huge concern. And so, yeah, for us, it's a little more involved, the entire process.
So do you have any preference to any prioritization frameworks that you use frequently? Because obviously with the enterprise model that you work with, you have a lot more steps and a lot more processes internally before you can put something out to a beta tester. So I'm just curious, is there any prioritization frameworks that you like or you have a preference for?
Yeah, for the one I think I've used the most is called the RICE model, which is reach, impact, confidence, and effort. So it basically allows for you to sort of think through how many people is this feature going to be useful for, what type of impact will this have, and then in terms of confidence, like how sure are you that your first two numbers are accurate, and then effort is just in engineering time, how long is this going to take? And we often work on features that sometimes take 3 years to build, so that can be really significant while we're making those decisions. So that's definitely a framework that I like to use. And there's also another one called the Kano model, which basically says that in order to keep your customers happy, you need to have 3 broad categories of areas in which you're working on. One is, just maintaining the status quo and ensuring that your users are still having a good experience. The second one is sort of delighting them, which is, those really cool features that users see and just go, wow, I love this product. And I think the third is just scaling out what you already have. So as more and more customers use it, they tend to expect more from it in terms of performance. So making sure you're constantly climbing that scale. So I think I try to have a good mix between these 3 categories. And that's something to keep in mind when I do my prioritization.
Definitely. How about you, Pippa? Do you focus much on prioritization frameworks, or are you more of a here's what we think and we can, mock something up and see how it actually works?
It varies depending on the scenario. I would say kind of in my usual, like that sort of startup messy, throw things and see what sticks kind of team. It's less about prioritization because we've kind of got the freedom to explore new ideas. I think if we were kind of going to release a new product that we then wanted to iterate on and optimize, then we would get into prioritization, because there's, you know, potentially bits of kind of smaller feedback and things that can be broken up into pieces of work. And as soon as you get pieces of work beyond going live, we start to kind of feel a need for prioritization. At that point, I've used the RICE framework, or occasionally ICE when I've not been sure of reach in the past, but I think we struggle because we don't have that same access to customers that Nikita's talking about. Yeah. Our users could be anyone. It's actually quite difficult to get hold of them for detailed interviews, which is why we tend to use surveys. Yeah, we just don't have that level of understanding of them yet to be able to give anything a confidence and impact score. So we kind of, I don't like to say that I go by gut feel, but I do go by gut feel. It's like kind of just a mix, as Nikita was kind of talking about, of, you know, things that, I guess I should look more at the Kano model actually, but things that, you know, are keeping us running, things that are making things better, things that are like really out there, like brilliant things, and trying to give a good mix of that. And also trying to give the developers like a good variety of stuff to work on, because I've yet to come across a developer that wants to work on the same thing all the time for the next 3 years as well. So yeah, trying to kind of give that balance and that variety, but I've not kind of used a proper prioritization framework for a while, because I've just found it doesn't work as well for us right now.
Definitely. Now, this next question, I'm pretty curious, because, you know, Nikita, you have a B2B model. Pippa, you have a B2C model. Now, is there a typical day in your life? You know, walk us through, you know, a day in the life of your role as a product manager. So Nikita, you wanna tell me first?
Yeah, for sure. So I think typically we will have meetings with one or more of our engineering teams, get an update of how things are going, what they're working on, if there's any blockers, or, you know, what I can do to help prioritize something. We do have a lot of cross-functional teams, and so we have a lot of requests that come into our team and vice versa. So a lot of that is up to be managed by me, which means I have to say no to a lot of people asking for things, and I also have to beg other teams to do what we need them to do. And so there's a lot of, I would almost say I do more people management than product management a lot of times. And that's, I guess, a function of working maybe at a larger company. And then also spend a lot of my time talking to customers, you know, also placating customers when things go wrong. So we do spend a lot of time apologizing when something breaks. So that's something that, you know, it's interesting because you get to really hear their pain points on an everyday basis. And I really enjoy having that level of interaction. Like, I used to work at B2C companies before, and like Pippa was saying, it's hard to get hold of them.
Yeah.
And it's like people are more than willing to give you feedback. Like, you could be in calls all day if you wanted to be. So it's nice to hear directly from your users. And then we also spend time, you know, with other PMs in the team. Since it's so large, it's really good to hear about what other people are working on and how that impacts your product area, and making sure we're all aligned on overall company strategies so that we're going through the same path. So yeah, that's mainly what I spend my time doing: engineers, other PMs, UX designers, and customers.
Excellent. How about you, Pippa?
It's quite a mix again. I think, like, as you probably know when asking the question, there is no such thing as a typical day. Yeah. As Nikita says, I don't get to talk to users much. I think that might be kind of a bigger kind of attribute of B2C generally. So there's not much of that I'd like. But because we do surveys, there's quite a bit of data analysis I do. I'm constantly in Google Analytics and Hotjar, and trying to kind of figure out what's going on with our users and what might be breaking. We've had quite a focus on accessibility actually this quarter. So it might be, you know, helping the team out by actually running accessibility testing myself and looking at accessibility testing tools and doing reading around a subject like that. There's a lot of stakeholder management, which is kind of similar to Nikita. We can get requests in from teams. You know, scientists have got a funding bid to build a new product and things like that. Yeah, talking to the other PMs, keeping up with my team and checking in on them, because there's not so many of us. We're not quite as fast paced, so it's like a couple of times a week rather than regular stand-ups. Yeah, lots of conversations, lots of slide decks, lots of data analysis, I would say, if I was going to sum it up.
Definitely, that sounds both roles sounds very interesting. I've worked in B2B and B2C as well. It's very different, but it's also similar in some instances. Now, how do you interact with leadership? I'm assuming, Nikitha, you have layers of leadership, and Pippa maybe not so much. But how do you interact with leadership, and what are the layers that you have to face?
Yeah, so for me, actually, it's interesting because VMware is very large, but somehow the levels of hierarchy are like not that far away. So I think between myself and the CEO, there's probably like 3 or 4 at most layers of management, which, when you think about it, 30,000 employees, it's not really a lot.
No.
So in that sense, yeah, we have pretty direct, I would say, relationships with leadership. Although in my case, I think so my manager is really great and does a really good job of kind of keeping a nice buffer in between me and the upper layers of leadership. And this is good because at those levels is when all of the political stuff is happening, stuff that I don't necessarily want to deal with.
Yeah.
Like I like my job, like I love working on product. I really don't want to have to deal with all of that. So it's really nice when you get really clear direction from your manager about what it is they want you to achieve, and then they kind of take care of everything that's happening above it. So for me, it's like, yeah, I see the leadership around and we have a good relationship. But really, it's me and my manager that are working together the most closely, and everything above that is managed by him. And I'm happy not to be involved in that part of it.
Excellent. What about you, Pippa?
So actually kind of a similar thing, if I think about it. There's about 3 people between me and the director of the museum, which is something I hadn't thought about before, and it's quite scary. But I think potentially the difference is that as we start to go out of up the kind of leadership ladder, there's people that are doing much more than digital and actually potentially don't have as much of a stake or an interest in it, because like I say, there's so much else going on in the museum. So quite similar to Nikitha, actually, a lot of the time our kind of working relationships and our closest kind of relationship to leadership is just like my manager and that kind of level up, because she understands digital really well. She is enabling me to get on with product work and dealing with the politics kind of very similarly. And you go above that and you get to people that are kind of managing multiple different work streams, of which digital is just one. And it's not that they don't prioritize that or see the importance of it. They absolutely do, but there's just more going on for them. So they're kind of potentially less invested in the particular products that we're building at a particular time. So yeah, not too many kind of layers, but most of the time we sort of stick to our own, at least at my level.
Fair enough. So let me add a follow-up question to that. So as you're interacting with different departments and different teams within the museum, do they have an idea of what the PM team does, or do you have to educate them first before you have a request or you interact with them? How does the PM sit in terms of the rest of the organization in terms of knowing what your team does?
Is that for me or?
So continue with you, Pippa, first.
Yeah. Sorry. So there are kind of varying levels of understanding, I think, depending on how we've worked with them in the past. To give a bit of history, the Natural History Museum moved, like our digital team moved to a product model about 3 years ago now. Okay. I wasn't there for that transition. I kind of was hired afterwards to help facilitate it. And before that, we were kind of what I'd say is a more traditional digital team model within a charity, which is that it's very much a service delivery team. Other stakeholders and other teams decide what's needed, decide kind of what content is needed or what products are needed, and the team's job was to deliver that. So we've moved now. We're trying to be kind of a product-focused team, trying to be strategic in our own right. We have our own priorities and our own targets, but the levels to which stakeholders understand that and are kind of on board with that at the moment varies. Part of my job is getting them to understand that and getting them on board with it and letting them see kind of what opportunities could come from it. but also trying to kind of say no or say yes, but to some of those kind of briefs that are given to us, like those kind of strict delivery briefs, to move us away from doing that kind of stuff.
Definitely. Nikitha, I think I know what you're going to say, but same question to you. When you're interacting with the rest of the organization, how well is the PM team, department, your team known within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, good thing is being a software B2B company, pretty much everyone knows who product managers are and what they do. I think some companies are very engineering driven in terms of their product development process, and some companies are very product driven. I would say VMware is somewhere in between. We do have a lot of initiatives that come from engineering because there's a lot of technical innovation, right? We're submitting patents, and a lot of times the idea comes first, and then we figure out how to productize it. And yes, that's more engineering driven, but a lot of times too, PMs come up with the ideas and ask engineering to execute on it. So I would say it's a little bit of both in our case, but at least, everyone kind of knows what the role of a PM is and what we do. So they know when to seek us out. So once engineering has reached a point of their exercise where they're like, okay, we're ready to take this to market, that's when they'll come to us. So they know what what we do, fortunately.
Fair enough. So continue on with that. In your opinion, what are some of the skills that you believe you need to have or grow as a PM in your role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there are so many things every single day that I find myself wishing I was better at. So the long list is pretty long. But I would say, I think at minimum, it's really the ability or the interest in wanting to always learn, because there's so much you don't know, especially in a technical field like this one. Every day I get stumped on some question someone's asking me. And so I'm always constantly learning. And if that's not something that you want to do as a PM, then it's really difficult to be a successful one. The second thing I would say is just the ability to communicate. And this is both through, verbal medium as well as the written word. A lot of times we're spending, I spend a lot of my time just writing emails to people, writing Slack messages, creating PowerPoints, describing product requirements. And all of this is really a test of your writing skills. And it doesn't mean you have to be an author of a book, but just being able to get across your message in a clear and succinct way is really important. And I guess the third one would just be, being able to really build relationships with people in your team and people across teams. So like we were talking about earlier, a lot of product management is being able to influence without authority, right? And that only happens when you have really good relationships with people. And that's not something that happens overnight. So you really have to put a lot of time and effort into understanding, people's motivations and what makes them tick, and then just really helping them and seeing that come back to you.
Yep, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was trying to prep you before the call, but you brought it up. I wanted you to put that in there. Thank you. How about you, Pippa?
I think this is the first time Nikitha and I completely agree, which is great. I think that those softer skills are definitely the kind of foundations of PM for me. Like that willingness to learn, that ability to communicate, and that ability to kind of build relationships. Really, it's what PMs need to do in pretty much every scenario to enable the rest of their team to do the actual brilliant kind of build and design work they need to do. Yeah. So yeah, totally on board with that. And I'm not really sure there's much else to say. I think specifically to my role, that there is some patience required. I sometimes joke that at the museum we move along the same geological timescales that the dinosaurs did. It can sometimes feel like it takes that long for things to get done, just because there's a lot of other things going on in the rest of the museum, and everyone else kind of works to project timelines and to waterfall kind of methods. So that's kind of one thing I would add that's maybe quite specific to my role or to the charity sector. And I've also kind of written down in my notes that acknowledging, as well as that ability to learn, there's that ability, I think, to be open and honest about your mistakes and to acknowledge them and to talk about how you're going to learn from them as well. It can be quite easy to just talk about your successes and to try and skim over the failures. But I think being kind of, especially with your team, like being that open and that honest is really the best way to build those relationships that you need as well.
Definitely. I find if people are willing to talk about their failures, but their understanding of why it failed and how it failed, that lesson is very important, as opposed to here's how I did it and here's what it worked for me. So now, I do find that very interesting on how people talk about failures and the why behind it or the how they could improve next time.
Definitely.
So what does success mean to you, Nikitha?
In a generic sense or specifically?
As a PM?
Yeah, because that would be like almost a philosophical question.
Yes. Not something to spring on someone in the middle of a call. That way.
I think really just being able to ship products and features that make your customers happy, if I had to summarize it.
Yeah, fair enough. How about you, Pippa?
I think because we're at a different phase and we're still trying to introduce product to the organization, success for me at the moment is doing better than the day before. And that sounds really cheesy, but I find that I can't really compare us right now or potentially ever to kind of big Silicon Valley companies, Google, Facebook, etc., and their ways of working. So I tend to kind of try and look back every so often at what we've done and go, do I feel like we've learned something as a team? Do I feel like we're doing better now? Can I kind of point to improvements that we've made in our kind of product practice or our relationships or our ways of working? And if that's the case, then yeah, I'm good. I've done all that I need to do.
Fair enough. So we have a couple of audience questions. So, Nikitha, first to you, what advice would you give? What advice would each of you give to your product managers starting new in your respective fields?
Yeah, I think for me, it would be really understanding the product. So that means digging into all of the product documentation that is available to you, talking to your customers, talking to other PMs in your team, just trying to educate yourself in every way possible, because especially in my field, which is technical, it can be hard for someone outside the field to really jump in. And so just learning about it and being open to hearing other people and their perspectives on the product is really helpful. And then I think also just keeping an eye on what's happening in the industry. So, competitive trends, what other companies in the cloud space are doing, especially since it moves so rapidly, it's always important to be on top of that. So I would say those are the top two things that I would recommend.
Got it. How about you, Pippa?
So I think because it's kind of B2C potentially and the charity sector, I think understanding your users for me is the most important thing. When I first started in my role at the museum, I think I spent the first 2 months just in Google Analytics and putting out Hotjar surveys, because you really need to be able to speak to what's happening on the website. You need to be able to kind of understand that before you can then take that to stakeholders and other teams in your own team and go, this is the problems, because you need to have the kind of data and the evidence behind that. So yeah, that would kind of be my first tip, is to really, for a B2C role, potentially to really understand your users and to understand what's going on. The second one is kind of similar to Nikitha, like reading around the subject and really understanding the industry that you're in as much as you can. Even like in our case, for me, again, that was like looking around the website and truly understanding what kind of content we offered, what different purposes different sections of the website might have, what products we had on offer. Understanding kind of what the museum and the business does is really important. And then understanding the kind of organization around you, I guess. So understanding the stakeholders, who's leadership, who you likely need to talk to, what relationships do you need to start building, even if just to go and ask them lots of questions and not offer up anything of yourself just yet, to just understand what's going on around you before you can start making decisions.
Definitely. Now, do you have a favorite book or a blog that you read generally, Pippa?
I was subscribed to Mind the Product, but they're turning their newsletter into a paid one now, so that's almost definitely going to end. I am signed up to Product Manager HQ, which does a similar kind of weekly newsletter that I do enjoy. There's some good product links in there. It helps kind of, because there's quite a lot of product articles out there. It helps kind of find some good ones. And yeah, I'm going to do the kind of standard thing that probably everyone says, but Marty Kagan's Inspired book, it's like if you were going to read one book, that book. that's all there is to say on that one.
Fair enough. How about you, Nikita?
So I really like Ken Norton's blog about product. I think he was one of the early PMs at Google, I believe, and he has some really interesting blogs on his website. And I don't particularly subscribe to product newsletters like the ones Pippa mentioned, but I stay pretty active on Twitter, and I think that's one way in which I find a lot of really good content about product management. So I would just suggest kind of picking one PM you like, seeing who they follow and follow who they follow. I think that's a pretty easy way to get to a good Twitter feed of really useful content. In terms of books, The Design of Everyday Things I know gets recommended a lot, and it's a really good one. I know it's a bit dry and can be a little bit of a slog, but I think it's worth it, so I would recommend it.
Fair enough. And how do you keep learning about new technologies as new things appear in your space?
Yeah, so I think in this particular area, I'm subscribed to like several industry-specific newsletters, and that's just something that I have to do. We also have, organizations like Gartner that do analyses every quarter or so, and I'm sure there's one for every industry. There's also a newsletter in this specific area, which I really like. It's called Strat Equity by Ben Thompson. And I think in the software space, like this person is like revered, and I usually really enjoy his takes. So that's pretty much what I use to keep up to date for the most part. That and a lot of Google.
Fair enough. And Pippa, how about you? How do you keep up to date with all the technologies that you need in your role?
So I think my role being B2C and kind of being what it is, I think it sounds a lot less technical than Nikita's role. So I'm not really, I don't need to keep up to date with the technologies themselves. My kind of role is to ask the developers like what technologies we need to deliver something, to ask the designers kind of what we should consider design-wise to design something and kind of try and pull that together. So a lot of the time I'm actually learning about new technologies by talking to the developers in my team and kind of going, what's the best way to build this, and finding out that it turns out there's some kind of new technology. But yeah, I don't have much technological knowledge at all, really. I kind of have a broad interest in digital and in technology and in web technologies. And then I kind of let the devs figure out the best way to build stuff.
Fair enough. Now, Nikita, can you talk us through some of the lessons you've learned over the years as a PM?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the more important ones for me has been like you can't plan for every possible outcome, and that's something I think I've tried to do to my detriment. Like as much research as you do and how much ever you speak with your customers, and no matter how well the solution is designed, sometimes there are things that just don't work. And it has nothing to do with you as a person, your skills as a product manager, your execution, your team's execution. And sometimes it just, is the luck of the draw, or it's the timing of the market, or it just happened to be the wrong thing at the wrong time. So I think I've learned over time to sort of, still take away lessons from those types of failures and learn from it and apply those to the future versus taking those to heart and, thinking of like, I'm not a good product manager, maybe I should go and do something else.
Definitely. And how about you, Pippa?
Yeah, I think agree completely with what you said. Sometimes things will just go wrong, and not taking it personally is really, really key. Understanding that you can't control everything and that some things take time is really important. I think what I've learned is to not measure myself by others if I was going to pick one lesson. So there definitely is imposter syndrome going on. Like I deal with it all the time, and it can be quite hard when you see lots of articles about big successes and big wins, and like you wouldn't believe what we did to our conversion rates kind of things. I've learned to kind of start letting that go and to stop measuring myself by what others are doing, and to start looking at, am I doing better as a product manager? Am I learning? Have I kind of improved from where I was a few months ago? And that means that I've then kind of got more of a freedom to to feel like I'm improving rather than trying to measure myself against an impossible goal that I'm sure was written at a time of great success after many failures that were not spoken about. So yeah, that would be my big lesson.
Fair enough. So keeping with that theme, in the last year, Pippa, what would you have done differently that you think now that you look back and think, oh yeah, I should have done this or I could have done this?
That's a great question. It's quite tricky because the last year has seen a lot of change for us. With COVID and lockdown, we've changed our product team structures. So I'm now currently working in a different product team with very different goals from where I was. But if I look back to that, the kind of my normal team, in inverted commas, I think what I learned is that I have a habit of getting into my own head and thinking it's me against the world to try and get stuff through sometimes. That's actually only been made worse by working from home. So I need to work on that still. But if I was going to do it again, I'd be much more open to developing ideas with the team rather than trying to develop them all in my little corner and then presenting them as done. I can still kind of think it's all on me to do all of it and try and minimize the amount of work on others. And actually, that's not a very good and collaborative way of working. So yeah, I would do that differently if I did the same year again.
Definitely. Thank you. And how about you, Nikitha?
Yeah, so I think last year around this time was when I almost hit my 1-year mark at VMware, and I was still a new product manager right outside of business school, and I was, in awe of all the people I was working with. These were really senior engineers and product leaders. And so I think I was, really kind of doubting myself a lot of the time and wasn't feeling really confident about taking a stand on, product ideas or features, and was sort of trying to go with the consensus versus having an opinion. And there's times when that's required, right? Consensus is important, but I think there were also times where I let a lot of things slide that maybe I shouldn't have, because there were times I knew when something was not really right or wasn't going to work out the way we thought it would, when I should have said something, but I didn't. And I think it's taken, part of it was just really time. I needed to grow into myself, be more confident in my abilities, and that's happened. But I think, like Pippa was talking about, like imposter syndrome is really real, especially, as a woman in a very engineering-driven organization, especially on the younger side. I felt really, it was a challenge for me to speak up, and I think I'm still finding my voice.
Definitely. Now, what would you say, Nikitha, for someone who's looking to get into PM, maybe start their career as a PM? What would you say to that person who's, maybe in college thinking about being a PM, or is within, the first 3-6 months of actually being a PM?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting and fun job to do. A lot of people, though, I think misunderstand what being a PM is, especially with all the PM is the CEO of the product thing going around. It can be less glamorous than that when you're actually doing it. So yeah, I would just say people should come into it with a really open mind, and PM at different companies is very different. So, you may have a really awful experience at one company as a PM and have a really great experience at another company. So I think it's important to really set your expectations for what you want from a product management role and make sure to choose companies and industries where you actually get that. And so working as a PM in a company like VMware is very different from working in the Natural History Museum. So you need to make that choice for you. And that comes with really understanding what your motivations are, what your skill sets are, and where your interests are.
Definitely. Thank you. Same question to you, Pippa.
Yeah, I think I would definitely echo what Nikitha says. Companies and sectors can have very different feels to the PM role. So it's as much thinking about what you'd like to get out of the PM role and then what might suit you best in terms of your skills and your motivations. Definitely. Like there's no standard PM role, which is brilliant, I think. So yeah, think about what you want from it as much as what it can give to you. And then I would also say that there's a lot of articles, advice out there that kind of talk about the harder skills. And I see a lot of people in Slack communities going, how much technical knowledge do I need? Do I need to have taken a Scrum Master qualification? All of this kind of stuff. And there's less of a focus on the kind of softer skills that you need. And Pradeep, I swear I wrote this down before you prepped me for it earlier. But yeah, I really think like you're going to find it harder to level up your softer skills and your strategy if you're starting from zero, as opposed to kind of leveling up your understanding of technologies or your understanding of design principles and things like that. Because the harder skills, I think, are the easier to learn as you go, and the easier to ask questions of from the rest of your team, like your tech lead and your design lead. The softer skills, you're going to need them from day one, and it's going to be very apparent if you're struggling with them. So I would say work on those, whether you're kind of thinking about being a PM or starting out. Just kind of make sure you're comfortable with having lots of conversations and communications with people, and test the waters of your skills really, and make sure you're building those up first.
Absolutely. You both made my day, because whenever anyone talks about soft skills, communication, negotiations, influencing, I get excited because that's the area that I love working in. So you both made my day for that. Thank you so much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I've had an awesome time chatting with you both. The idea was to compare and contrast the differences between a product manager who works for a company where the product is the software versus Natural History Museum where the product isn't software. So thank you very much to both of you. Before we end the session, is there anything you'd like to say to aspiring PMs, junior to mid-level PMs, before we leave?
I would just say, if you already know that PM is something that you want to do, but you're not in that role yet, I think there's ways in which you can develop your skills and create a portfolio for your future roles. Just become really active about trying new products out, download the apps that you see, and create a framework in your mind of how you would assess these products, and just really learn. And I think, if you really enjoy it, that's something that will come really naturally to you, and getting that next role hopefully would become a little easier.
Thank you. And how about you, Pippa?
Yeah, I'd say I'd really recommend it to anyone who kind of loves talking and collaborating with people. So, if that's your thing, absolutely go for PM. I would also say consider the charity sector, because right now they're running a bit behind other sectors. And that means that PM is a very early kind of starting role in that sector. So there's really loads of opportunities to learn and grow and potentially kind of get into roles like PM roles that it might be more difficult to get to. It's like applying to, an associate PM program at somewhere like Google and things like that. So yeah, give the charity sector a go. We need more PMs.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Nikitha, next time, hopefully when COVID and travel restrictions are open, I'd love to have a tour of VMware. And Pippa, next time I'm in London, I'd love to come and see behind the scenes of the Natural History Museum.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So thank you everyone who joined in. Next week, we have our session. It's called How to Get Started as a Product Manager in the Financial Services Industry. And that's next Friday, September 18th at 12 noon Eastern. So thank you, Nikitha, and thank you, Pippa.
Thank you.
Okay.